Greetings, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pod Scum. This right here is the podcast where we dive into the deepest, darkest, murkiest waters with a plethora of legendary guests, and today is no different. I am, of course, your host, your bastard of ceremonies, the numero uno scumbag, Rex Ruger. That's Rex with thrice X's. Count them. You might also know me as a.k.a. the King of Sleaze, a.k.a. the Hair Metal High Priest, and most importantly, a.k.a. Diamond David Lee Roth Jr. That's right, you're looking at him. The son of glam, the front man for the band. Just smoked a few grams, got a million fans. I'm your ice cream man, Mr. Wop Baba Loo Bapa Wop Bam Bam Shazam. Damn. Feeling good? Everybody in the house looking good? Pops is looking good. I'm looking good. Coming to you as always from the lush, lavish, lavender lounge of love, where it all goes down. Joined as always by Keith Hernandez Puppet. And if you're looking at this coif and you're saying, how do I get my hair to look like that? Product placement, baby. Right there. Get it, learn it, love it. This is, of course, the No Frills podcast. You don't get no frills because you get plenty of thrills. And those thrills are looking at moi. Plus, as you all know, I don't know jack shit about technology, so I get in here and give you my little spiel, and then it's on to the kick-ass interviews. And today we got ourselves a bona fide, legit 80s legend. A lot like you, Pops. I don't know if he's quite the star power, but pretty damn good. So we will get him in here. We will chop it up. Let me also remind you that I am still looking for players for my own band, which I front. And I do front numerous glam and sleaze metal bands up and down the Eastern Seaboard with my main focus on Love Sword. You can't be the front man because there can only be one. But if you'd like to be in a band and you're virtuoso level or above, and I don't even know what the fuck above would even be, but hit me up, serious inquiries only, and you could be feasting your eyes on the backside of the second greatest frontman to ever do it. But let me try to get our guest in here. Today we got a legit OG, baby. A legit OG. Such a big 80s rock star that I'm going to give myself a second look. Mainly because I want to look good and mainly because I want to admire myself. Pops, what do you think? Like father, like son. Keith? No cocaine in your mustache tonight. Good looking out. Of course, we are focusing mainly on the 80s, though, where, cocaine did a lot of its big damage, had its big surgence or resurgence or whatever you want to call it. And Keith, you dabbled a little bit, did you not? Nah, whatever. Keith ain't saying much today. And my guest is just putting the final touches on coming in here. So again, folks, I urge you to go to the YouTube page, like, subscribe, and I will keep bringing you. I will make it my singular mission to keep bringing you ass-kicking content with legendary guests. So please like, please subscribe, and a big shout out as we start a new year here to all my guests that came on the show last year in 2022, the inaugural first year of Pod Scum. Thank each and every one of you. Hopefully this go around, we'll do it again with all of you. Get all my old friends back on here again for some laughs and chop it up and find out what's good in everybody's life. Looking for a big 2023. Go on the YouTube page. Pod Scum on the YouTube channel. And my guest, if you bear with me here for a minute, is having a bit of a tough time getting in here, and here he is right now. So let's get down to another episode of Pod Scum and let's chop it up. Keith, you ready? I know you've been excited all week for this one. Let's get him in here, my man.
Hey.
There he is. How are you, Jack?
I'm good. I've got you on my mobile, so
That's all right. That's all right. It might make the picture a little better if you're able to turn it, but if not, no big deal. No big deal.
okay.
I've had lots of people do them on the mobile phones. I mean,
Yeah, for some reason, laptop's not wanting to behave.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I know it's funny. Technology doesn't always cooperate with us the way we want it to.
Should I turn the lighting up in the room a little, or is it okay?
If you want to, yeah, sure. Go ahead. Yeah. Let all the guests get a good look at you. Absolutely.
Let's do that.
I usually enter a room, Jack, and I try to make it darker, but
yeah. I can.
That's to hide all the age in the face. You know what I mean? Like I got a birthday coming up in a couple weeks. I'm going to be the big 50, and I'm kind of bummed out about it. I got to admit. I mean, it's
just a baby. You're just a baby.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That makes me feel better. For my audience out there, legendary Jack Hughes. You know him. You may have Wang Chunged along with him back in the 80s, man. You were out there doing your thing in the 80s, man. Had a lot of success. Catch everybody up. What you've been doing since then?
Last when was it? October. I released a new double album, which is called Epigonal Quark, and that's me, Jack Hughes, with the quartet. And the quartet is sort of a free form collection of jazz and rock musicians who I sort of work with on occasions.
Okay.
And, so yeah, I've been working on that project. Before that, I released a couple of solo albums, which were more song oriented. My work with the quartet tends to be a bit more instrumental. Yeah, so I've been really busy doing all kinds of solo stuff and jazz stuff.
Is there any form of Wang Chung? I mean, it's still in existence. You boys still get together? Yeah.
We toured last year.
Okay.
Last year, yeah. We're now in 23, aren't we? Yeah.
So yeah, we are.
August and October, we were in the States doing a bunch of shows. So yeah,
okay.
Still exists. You know, me and Nick still doing stuff. And this coming year, 23, we are at last going to be releasing a sort of in-depth retrospective of all the albums we did in the 80s.
Okay.
An album we did in 2012 as well, and we'll be doing sort of like deluxe editions and vinyl and all of that stuff.
Okay. Now, obviously, you guys first achieved your success, Wang Chung, I'm speaking of, in the 80s. Huge changes in the music industry. How do you feel about all this? I mean, not that there's a whole hell of a lot we can do about it, but we got to go along kicking and screaming, I guess. But how do you like all the music business nowadays with the digitalized and the music platforms? Are you an old school guy that still likes a physical product?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I mean, I see it's interesting to me because, Wang Chung has a good online, streaming sort of works for Wang Chung. Right. I think Dancehall Days is like over 90 million streams, and, we see a bit of income from that. And but I see that with my jazz and solo stuff, the streaming really doesn't work because, they're much lower, like very low, which is cool. Yeah. But I see that for young artists starting out, it's probably A, very discouraging, and B, financially not viable.
Right.
So streaming, I get, is a problem for new artists. It sort of works for older artists, strangely enough, but not.
Right.
I don't know. I was reading something, sort of. It was some guy writing, beginning of 2023, and he was like a young producer type guy in this country in the bemoaning the state of the industry and how it's sort of dominated by the majors and all of this stuff, and I kind of thought, well, it's always been difficult. Do you know what I mean? It's always been difficult as a young band to get through what used to be a very narrow little bottleneck, to record and to find, and in some ways, there are friends of mine who are working in more experimental areas who feel that today is much better than it used to be because you can at least get your music out there into a public forum, and there isn't too much interference from major labels or any labels for that matter.
Do you like well, I should probably phrase this way. Do you like the fact that that 80s music has kind of always, I don't know, at least to me as someone who grew up in the 80s, it seems like 80s music just will never, ever, not that I want it to, but it'll just never go away. And I think that's really it really speaks to the point of just, what a decade the 80s was. Talk to me a little bit about, though, your remembrances of 80s music and how you feel it's different from today's music. Obviously, nowadays, a kid can sit home and he can make an album on his laptop and not have any musical ability or, you know, even know how to play an instrument or whatever. You know, what big differences, glaring differences do you see?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much really, you know. I mean, this whole idea of you know, talent, as it were, being a determining factor. You know, there were lots of untalented people in the 80s making records, and
that's probably true.
It's a sort of jungle. Do you know what I mean? It's interesting. I was talking to somebody yesterday about this is probably not relevant, but in this country we have a thing called the Arts Council. I don't know what US, but it's like a government organization that funds art projects, you know.
Oh, that's great.
What a sort of crisis it's in, you know, because these art projects are now having to conform to all kinds of, as it were, restrictions, you know, around the content. You know, it makes it very difficult for sort of like radical artists to get on that train, as it were, you know. And I always sort of felt, well, the commercial music industry was much freer than that, you know, because I went to music college,
right.
Sort of looked at the possibilities of being like a composer, if you like, you know. I mean, at that time, it just wasn't right for me. But I always felt that the commercial music industry was a lot more robust, and really it did depend on you getting an audience and on your work having some sort of public acceptance, and pretty damn good to sort of get into that, you know. So there was less bullshit, if you like, you know.
Yeah.
So the 80s was sort of like a, you know, pretty real in the sense that the bands, you know, most of them could play. I think we were all very influenced, you know, although punk had happened in the UK in sort of 76 through to let's say what, 79, 80.
Yeah.
Powerful effect on all the musicians in terms of their aesthetic. It certainly affected me, even though I'd been to music college. You know, I was really excited by the Sex Pistols and the fact that they kicked everything over and you had to sort of start again and reinvent, you know. But I think we also all, and I'm speaking for the great mass of 80s artists, you know, grown up listening to the Beatles and to prog records and stuff, you know. We were new into the business, you know, and we brought that sort of, if you like, respect for making records and craftsmanship and songwriting craftsmanship especially, very much into play. And I think maybe it's the songwriting craftsmanship that gives the 80s music its durability. There are songs there that are that sort of very good standalone creations.
I agree. Yeah.
And I think songwriting has suffered a lot since computers have been the dominant force in the process.
Couldn't agree more.
Are all about cut and paste, so that it makes everything very repetitive, basically.
Whereas it takes a little bit of the soul out of stuff. It seems to take a little bit of the soul and the grit out of stuff.
To a degree, I think it's more process of that when you're sitting with the guitar, you get an idea and you're varying it all the time because you don't want to get bored, basically.
Right.
You know, songs have a sort of structure and they evolve, you know, whereas I don't hear much evolution happening in modern records, you know, unless they're in a sort of consciously sort of prog kind of direction, you know.
Well, when you you know, as you mentioned, you know, you went to college for music, so that's obviously somebody putting their best foot forward and saying, I'm going to take this extremely seriously. Was it always the vision, even when you were a kid? Was there ever anything else on the radar, or was it always going to be music for you?
Always music, yeah. From when I was years old, I heard the Beatles on the radio and then saw them on TV, and it was like that's my world, you know, in a way. They completely kind of, you know, the sort of little grey world I lived in, going to school and with my parents and stuff, ceased to be important, you know, and that more kind of technicolor world that they represented became my focus.
I'm really interested to hear from somebody who's such an avid fan, and I've watched other interviews with you, and you know, you're certainly not alone in your love for the Beatles, one of the most, you know, obviously beloved music groups, arguably the greatest musical group of all time, depending on who you ask, but certainly always vying for that top spot. What is it about them, specifically the Beatles, and maybe this could be like your love letter to the Beatles or whatever? What is it about them that got their hooks into Jack?
It's a good question. You know, I have a good friend, we're talking about doing some sort of podcast thing on the Beatles to try and get to what it is that makes them so unique and why they were such an incredibly powerful influence on kids who grew up with them, if you like. I get now, if you're like a young person listening to the Beatles, they're one of thousands of bands, and you may or may not get what they did. But for us growing up, especially in the UK, I think they represented something beyond the music, really. To do with a sort of English identity and a youth identity, maybe I should say a British identity,
Sure.
That was a sort of British as the Queen and the kind of red telephone boxes and stuff,
Right, they were synonymous with Britain. Sure,
they were, but they represented a sort of working class culture, if you like. And it was the first time, in a way, not that I could articulate like this at the time, but I think it was the first time, in a sense, that the world that you were growing up in as a young working class kid was represented on major media and was sort of not taken seriously, because you got that the adults didn't really get it, and that made it more exciting. Do you know what I mean? Because it was something that you got, that you had with them, that was really sort of unique. And I think it's very hard to convey that to people now growing up, where music is just one of a number of kinds of entertainment. But I think that was, and then I think that just their sheer ability as songwriters to create these sort of songs that have quirky harmonies that are sort of unpredictable to us to a large degree, and certainly as they developed, they became much more creative and unpredictable with the tools they were using. And I think that whole curve that you were on with them, I was on with them, from Please Please Me through to Strawberry Fields, 4 or 5 years, when I was like 8 to 12 years old and learning guitar and sort of finding my feet, was like an incredible sort of lesson, as it were, in creativity.
In the course of your travels and touring the world and being at different events and everything, have you yourself ever had the privilege to meet any Beatles?
I did meet a Beatle. I met Paul McCartney. Yeah. And that was at Air Studios when we were recording Dance All Days. We sort of got to the end of the recording process, pretty much. All of that album we did at Abbey Road. Very much as a sort of me and Nick, Darren and Chris Hughes, all massive Beatles heads. Chris was the producer, and we deliberately chose Studio 2 Abbey Road as the place we wanted to make this album, and we got to the end of the sort of main recording process, sent it all off to Geffen, who was our record label. They'd kind of come back and said, yeah, sort of do a bit more work on Dance All Days. I think they were kind of like, you may come up with another guitar line or do something, So Abbey Road wasn't free at that time, but Air Studios was, which was a studio that was owned by George Martin at that time. And Paul McCartney was recording in the same studio, like down the corridor, so Chris was listening to the track and said, maybe we should look at the bass again. And Nick's a left-handed bass player, and he was like, I haven't got my bass with me, So I jokingly said, well, maybe Paul would lend us one of his, and then a couple of hours later, the studio door opened and McCartney walked in with a bass and came up to me and said, was it you who wanted to borrow the bass? And I was just totally speechless, basically.
I was going to say, when that happens, are you 12 years old again?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you are, right? It's for some reason, I get that vibe off of them. I was watching an old episode of a radio show from several years back, and Ringo Starr was one of the guests, and everybody in the radio studio all kind of shared the same sentiment, that when there's like a Beatle in the room, it's just, everybody kind of just reverts back to childhood again. And there's an electricity and a buzz that these four guys were all capable of creating whenever they came into a room.
I think that's right. Yeah.
It's quite magical. It really is.
Yeah. But maybe, because I went to see Bob Dylan recently in London. He was doing some shows, and I had a similar feeling with him, actually, even though I was just an audience member. Sure. You're looking at this guy who carries with him this enormous legacy, and he's a living, breathing sort of, he's Bob Dylan, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
And however sort of questionable his performance was, I mean, I really enjoyed it, but had it been any other artist, probably would have been a lot more critical.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, what he was giving was something that we'll never see again,
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
when you sit down to create, do you have a specific routine or any kind of a specific room in the house or an ambiance or a setting, or do ideas just come to you? Do you have a set creative process? When you're going to sit down and write or create music.
no, I'm absolutely allergic to any routine. Actually, I've discovered about myself.
So ideas could just come flying from from any direction and at any time.
Yeah, I remember Don Henley talking about songwriting, and he said for him, writing was a bit like drawing on a well, and when you're writing a lot of stuff, the level of the well goes down,
Yeah.
give it a rest for a while, and I think for the last 3 years, I've been drawing on the well pretty heavily, actually,
Yeah.
But last year, well, since the summer of last year when I was touring, I haven't been doing so much, and I definitely felt at the beginning of this year, the well's up, and
Yeah.
the piano ideas start coming out, pick up a guitar ideas start coming out, so it's but it's a very sort of spontaneous process, and I guess maybe because I did have some training as a musician, I realized that spontaneity is probably the most important element to it, and not driving things into the ground and not overthinking, trying to keep everything in a slightly sort of dreamy, hazy place, and as long as possible.
Well, you also did some, and I don't know if you're still doing this, but I have in my notes here, early 2000s. You were also teaching a course on songwriting.
I did that, yeah.
Did you have a specific like a reason for doing that, or was teaching something you always wanted to try, or what kind of led you to trying that venture?
I guess I just got to meet a guy who was running a music course, a new music course, basically. So there are 2 universities in Canterbury. There's this sort of old established university, and then there's Canterbury Christchurch University, which used to be what we called a polytechnic. So it was like a sort of further education place.
Right.
But government policy meant that now everything's called a university, for better or worse. So he was setting up this music course, and he got to hear about me, and this guy sort of said, would you just come and teach for an afternoon, just the sort of music technology side of things, because I don't know anything about that. I can help people with playing and singing and performing, and I was sure I didn't really know anything about it either, do you know what I mean? But I'm happy to come and sort of muck in, and that gradually expanded. Another guy came in who was much more cognizant of who I was, without blowing that up, but he was just devise a course, a 3-year course for songwriting, and I'll get it sort of put through the system,
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that for probably about 5 or 6 years. I was teaching a full 3-year degree course to undergraduate students. And
so songwriting can be taught.
Well, I prefaced the course with the statement, I cannot teach you how to write songs.
Comes with a caveat, huh?
But I can encourage you to write songs. I can give you some tools. That means if you've got any ability at all, you'll be able to do something,
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting area, because the people who were good songwriters were quite often hopeless at everything else. Do you know what I mean? Like, and anything that involved a sort of logical mind, they struggled with, So in the I used to have this sort of thing where it was like, choose one of these 5 songs and write me an essay about the structure of the song, because all of the first year was learning about song structures,
Yeah.
And the really good songwriters all failed that because they couldn't sort of think.
I get that. Yeah.
But couldn't really grasp, they didn't have the ideas, did well, so I dropped the whole essay thing, but yeah, it was interesting. What I found was that as the course went on, everyone was kind of presenting their work, all of it's valid, of course, because these people are, it's a very personal thing, songwriting, and it almost starts therapy.
Yeah.
For the girls, I found more that they tapped much more deeply into their emotions and so on, and were quite sort of exposed in the way they wrote and stuff. The boys got more into the sort of technical kind of playing licks and struggled actually with the lyrics and stuff. So, I mean, I'm making vast generalizations here, and one guy I can think of immediately was a supreme lyricist, So there was huge amounts of talent there, and the job I found was just to sort of kind of steer people as best I could. Some people found it irritating, I think, and sort of very subjective, and other people sort of got into the fact that, okay, there is a sort of objective thing you can aspire to as a songwriter, especially when the structure and all of that stuff.
How did you fare health-wise throughout COVID in the quarantine? Did you yourself get sick at all?
Yeah, but towards the end, it wasn't too bad, and lockdown for me was kind of okay, really, because it just meant that I was had even more time to make an album.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. I'm curious. So it was a pretty fruitful, abundant time for you as far as creativity. You used that time and found it to be fruitful as far as creating.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I on this double solo album, double sort of vinyl, that is, in 2019, which should have exhausted the well, but I found I still had more stuff. Normally in 2020 I would have been trying to tour that record and at least do some of the songs with Wang Chung or something like that, but so I was put back here, excuse me, and I just sort of got on with another album which I released the following year, so for me it was very fruitful and got me into thinking about recording at home in a much more serious way and getting all the plugins and stuff that you sound after.
Now, obviously those 80s records, Dance Hall Days, Let's Go, Everybody Have Fun Tonight, very commercially successful albums. But looking back on those, though, are there any of those songs that, like, deep down inside you've ever gotten sick of? I mean, obviously they've been very good to you or whatever, and but are there times when you get sick of playing any of them?
And I can say it really honestly, no. I'm happy to play those songs for.
I love that.
Got an audience in front of you who just love it,
Yeah.
And also I think because I'm a musician who's constantly, I guess, challenging myself in different ways, and I think my playing and singing and stuff, I want to get better. As I approach those songs, I feel like I'm bringing different light to them and stuff, so the way the band sounds now is a much more like a sort of rock, an 80s band sort of thing, and the songs still stand up, because they're well constructed songs, so no, I don't get sick of it. I still love playing those songs.
Who was it the label that came to you guys and wanted the Wang Chung spelling and the band name changed?
I think
the record company,
we were signed to Arista in the UK in 1980, 81, something like that, and did an album with them where it's spelled HUANG, Huang Chung, and we just through that process of doing the press and all that stuff, and people taking the piss out of us. We sort of thought, well, maybe we should just change the name when we left Arista to sign to Geffen, but it was David Geffen who was I remember the meeting where he sort of said, no, you shouldn't change the name, just reset that it's less alienating when you look at it, so Wang Chung was so it was David.
And what about when you get the opportunity to do the soundtrack for To Live and Die in LA, 1985? That movie comes out. You guys are solely responsible for that whole soundtrack. How does that opportunity come to you? Is that something that gets offered to you? Is that something you kind of got to throw your hat into the ring? How does it work? How did it work back then, getting to be able to do a movie soundtrack? That
particular one was just completely out of the blue, so we were supposed to be writing our follow-up album, to the Dance Hall Days album, To Points on the Curve, and Bill Friedkin literally called me up. I was at a friend's house. I've told the story a lot of times, but we had a conversation for about an hour where he just talked about that he loved Wait, which is a track on Points on the Curve, and he like that. So he basically, there was no audition process sort of thing. He knew exactly what he wanted, and we were the band that he was already using in the movie sort of thing. So he just sort of said, just do more like that, It's a very loose brief, but it was, what the funny thing, of course, was that he said he didn't want a song. Don't write me a song called To Live and Die in LA. I just want instrumental music. So initially, that's exactly what we did, send it over to him. And in those days, there's no internet to sort of just like it took a couple of weeks for the tapes to get to him, for him to sort of sync it up to the soundtrack, to the movie, you know. But he loved it, absolutely loved it, and invited me and Nick over to his studios. Todd AO was his soundstage studio in Studio City at that time, I think. And yeah, that experience of sitting next to him watching the first rough cut of To Live and Die in LA was one of the most mind-blowing experiences ever, because it just looked and sounded so incredible, you know.
Yeah.
And from that, I went back to the UK, and I just couldn't help myself write To Live and Die in LA, because I could see the sort of commercial potential of the whole thing.
Sure.
And but that song just kind of came out. We sent that to Freakin as a demo, and he loved it, even though, you know, again, what a great guy that he didn't say, "I told you not to write a song."
Right. It's awfully tempting not to, though, and it does, and it is I mean, even as a title to a song, it's amazing.
It's great. It's great.
You know?
Yeah.
It fits.
Show at the Greek Theatre in Los Angeles, you know, sold out show, and we played that track, and it felt really special, you know, to play that song in LA.
Sure.
It was really magical. You know.
Who are some acts that you played with back in the 80s that you got to go on the road with, that you have some fond memories of touring with? I know 1987, if I'm not mistaken, you guys were out for a little while in the States with Tina Turner.
Yeah, we did a big set of her sort of tour. I forget which tour it was, but, you know, like I Can't Stand the Rain and all of those classic things she was doing, you know. So we were her act. And 84, we did a tour with the Cars.
Yes.
And that was amazing, you know. And I guess, you know, 84, you know, Wang Chung had been playing clubs and stuff, doing, and suddenly we were playing to 80,000 people.
Crazy, yeah.
So we were out of our depth, pretty much, but nevertheless, there was that sort of youthful enthusiasm and gung-ho thing, you know, that the crowd actually loved, I think, and found more appealing than the Cars' slightly more calculated approach to their show, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did well on those tours, and we got to play to a lot of people. It was great for us.
Are you somebody that has ever given any thought to and, you know, of course, we certainly, you know, the fans, we certainly don't want you going any place, but has it ever creeped into your mind to put like a stop date on like when you'll stop doing music? Or are you one of these guys that's like, you know, I'm going to drop dead on a stage somewhere? Or, you know, or have you put like a timetable and said, you know, I don't want to still be doing this at, you know, X age?
Yeah, I have thought that over the years. I thought when I'm 50.
Yeah.
When I'm 60, you know, I won't tell you where I'm thinking now, you know. But I think you just like, why would you stop? You know, when you can still do it. You know,
sure.
My voice.
Mick Jagger. I mean, Jesus, he's still getting around the stage pretty darn good, and he's as old as our president.
Absolutely. So I think, you know, just keep going, you know. And for me, music is a vast kind of landscape, you know. It's not just performing, it's writing, and it's also, you know, still studying music, you know. I'm still listening to a lot of classical music and go to concerts and operas and stuff, you know. I still, you know, my life really is pretty consumed with music in all its different forms.
Yeah. Obviously, a lot of huge, you know, and obviously, you know, I don't know your relationship with them all on a personal level, but obviously a lot of the people from back in that era have, unfortunately, passed away. We've lost some great artists, you know, Whitney Houston. We've lost, you know, Prince in the last couple of years, Tom Petty or whatever. When you look back and reflect on that, you know, a lot of the artists that we've lost, you know, and the legacy that they left behind. What do you feel like, or what do you hope that your own legacy will be, or the legacy of Wang Chung? Like, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I'd love that it was part of the canon, if you like. Do you know what I mean? That when people music, you know, Wang Chung's part of that landscape, you know. You know, we had success. We're a band, I think a sort of slightly oddball band in a way, you know. Maybe me as an artist is quite a hybrid for a rock musician, you know. But I think we made a good contribution, you know. And I think, you know, in retrospect, hoping this retrospective will capture it, you know. There's a lot more to us than just the you know, Dance for Days and Everybody Have Fun Tonight. And I hope people will get a chance to sort of hear that and some of the demos and the creative process. And so yeah, I'd like that. Yeah. As long as we get sort of remembered, I think I'll be fine.
As you get on in age, what kind of changes have you made as far as like touring? Like, what's your itinerary? Touring now, are as Wang Chung or whatever project you're doing. You obviously, I'm sure you don't go out for weeks and months at a time anymore. Do you kind of just do like select dates and do kind of isolated shows here and there?
Yeah. Summer we did this thing called the Lost 80s, which is a sort of like traveling festival, if you like, of 80s. So yeah, that's not too strenuous. 20-minute sets, maybe 30 minutes, and you're playing sort of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
So it's not like the sort of night after night slog that it used to be, and a different and stuff. Could I do that now? I don't know. Again, it's sort of like, let's see. Let's see if I get exhausted, tell you, and then we'll modify.
Well, as you said about people exploring those deeper tracks, does it ever get, or has it ever gotten frustrating where you think sometimes, that Wang Chung is too tethered to the 80s or too tethered to a couple of hit songs, and that maybe you guys haven't been explored as deeply as you should have or should be?
I'm grateful to be having this conversation with you. When I stand on those stages last summer, and there's 4,000, 10,000 people there, supremely grateful. Do you know what I mean? I've had to pay a price like Prince. Do you know what I mean? I'm not like on prescription drugs to kind of get these stuff. Yeah. I feel like I've had a pretty good time, really.
Yeah. Amen to that. Yeah. And plus, the 80s is not too bad of a time to be tethered to. I'll tell you what, man. I mean, I will always stand by it. It's not just because I'm, a product of the 80s and was a teenager in the 80s. But I mean, I hear kids nowadays telling me, this certainly warms my heart about people discovering stuff that, a younger generation going back and discovering that stuff, as we talked about at the top of the interview, about people going back and discovering even, going as far back as discovering the Beatles. But, there's such great 80s music that was made that it's nice to hear that, younger generations are going back and finding it.
Totally. I mean, that is one of the massive upsides of this kind of, the God's own jukebox sort of every. It's and I get when we play gigs, there are sort of younger people there as well as people who were clearly buying the records when they first came out.
So what is the future for we'll take it project by project. So is Wang Chung ever going to be a band that will record new music, or are you guys just kind of happy going out and playing all those great songs from those early albums?
Well, there's a couple of people saying to us we need to do new music, and I know Nick has been writing recently, and so I'm not making any promises, but there's a strong possibility that we'll release some new music this year, I think,
Okay.
And a counterpoint to the older stuff, So yes to that,
Well, let me ask you before you go to the next point, though. Do you have an opinion on the type or I should say, like the format that you will release the music? And I mean that as, a lot of bands, it's a very polarizing topic now where a lot of acts are putting out singles. A lot of people are going the EP route. A lot of bands are still going the full length album route. Do you guys have an idea in your mind as to which way you will go? We write a full record. Obviously the trend right now is a lot of people putting out singles and EPs. Do you guys have a stance on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very sort of involved in that, if you like. In the last album I did, my this jazz album, I call it jazz, it's a sort of mixture of jazz and rock and all sorts of stuff. Pig and a Quark, that's a double vinyl album that I've done a sort of limited edition of 500 copies, each one's hand signed, and that's it. And I haven't streamed it. I don't want to stream it. You get a free CD with the album, but I'm trying to present it as, this is an album that's designed to be heard on vinyl. And if you're not going to listen to it on vinyl, well, then here's the CD, but have vinyl format so that you can read the sleeve notes and get the sort of dimensions of it all. So I do think all that's very important. But with Wang Chung, I think Wang Chung is a more commercial venture, so we would certainly stream and do all of that stuff. And have Nick and I got it in us to do a whole album? I don't know. We'll just see how that goes, really. I sort of think my vision at the moment is that it will probably be a sort of EP type thing that we'll do.
Yeah. It just seems like nowadays that people just don't immerse themselves in the whole album experience anymore. And I talked about that on here before, where it just kind of seems like people are so, their attention is pulled in so many different directions, and there's only so many minutes throughout the course of a day, and people are just kind of like, okay, show me your best song or two, and that's what I'm going to grab onto, and the rest of it is just, it feels like sometimes like deeper tracks and things like that on albums just aren't getting explored as much, which is sad.
It is sad, yeah. I mean, Epigonal Quark, the first track is 27 minutes long.
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
Every track on it, there's under 9 minutes, I don't think. So, I'm really into, and for myself, I love the old format albums. We needle on at the beginning of the record, and you don't take it off until you turn it over and listen to side 2.
Right. Well, it was the whole experience too. It was looking at album art, it was reading liner notes, it was reading lyrics, it was reading all that stuff, to opening up the gatefold with cassettes back in the 80s. I mean, it was kind of a whole experience, like when you went out and got an album or a cassette or a CD, all that stuff, and putting it on and just digesting it from track 1 to track whatever, in its entirety, and enjoying it as an experience. I think that's kind of gotten lost.
Yeah, but I think also that when we were kids, if you like, that was the cutting edge technology of the day.
Yeah.
So have that in our pockets, or in our bedrooms, or whatever it was. Now kids have, they have the cutting edge technology, which is not music. It's
right.
Visual.
All right, so we might get a new Wang Chung. There's hope there for a new Wang Chung. What else do you have going on now? You've got the quartet.
I got the quartet and my solo stuff. So with the quartet, I'd like to do some shows. Realistically, I don't think I'm going to be able to have anything this year, but next year, I kind of like the pendulum swing. So if this coming year is going to be about Wang Chung, then next year I'd like to be about the quartet and my more experimental stuff, and that for a while. And I think the two things sort of refresh each other and keep me.
So you kind of like, when you're invested in a project, you kind of like just kind of keeping you kind of just like staying in that lane.
Yeah,
just working on one thing at a time, because there's lots of artists that come on here that are Jesus. They're in 4 or 5 different projects, all going at the same time.
Yeah. No, I can only do the one thing at a time, really. I had to really immerse myself in things and take my time with it. And slow food.
and is the quartet stuff? Obviously Wang Chung can be found on the musical platforms. Is the quartet stuff out there as well?
Yeah, it's on Spotify, a lot of it, apart from this latest album, which I'm being, difficult about. But yeah, the other stuff's on Spotify. So it's Jack Hughes and the quartet. And it's all worth exploring, I think. In fact, there's a writer here called Sid Smith, who's like a reviewer on Mojo magazine and various things, and he did a nice thing on social media saying, with all my jazz stuff, saying like, if you albums, take a listen, they're really good. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, that's always nice to hear good feedback. It is, especially in this day and age, because there is still a large influx of music out there. It's not that the music industry is certainly not lacking an output of music. It's just finding the time to to hear it all. Well, I mean,
it used to be heavily filtered before it got to us, didn't it? And that, but so now you've got to sort through it yourself. But there's still some great things. There's an album that came out in 2020, I think it was, called by a guy called Floating Points.
Okay.
Floating Points, and his album's called Promises. I think it was a sort of record of the year in one of the music mags here. But it's I've got a Pharaoh Sanders playing saxophone on it, and that to me is a masterpiece of an album and a real long form listening experience. It's totally beautiful. Yeah.
And so the quartet stuff, you would say, obviously a departure from the pop new wave sound of Wang Chung. Is the quartet stuff more kind of jazz influenced?
Yeah, I guess jazz in the sense of like Miles Davis around Bitches Brew, Live Evil, Mahavishnu Orchestra come to mind sometimes. So I guess it's jazz in the sense that there's a lot of improvisation in it. It's quite loose, and the more recent stuff, I'm using 2 drummers. One's a sort of real rock drummer, and the other's much more of a filigree kind of jazz drummer.
Yeah.
Guys and the way they approach rhythm is really interesting. So I think it's an exciting band to watch. But I think Epigonal Quark's really worth a listen. It's like I said, it's a long form. It's like the first track is, I think, 23 minutes, actually, something like that, and it takes like 10 minutes before anything happens, really. But it's just It's a kind of it's very intuitive, the whole thing, you know, and the pieces are quite loose in terms of what we have in front of us to play, you know, and a lot of it is just about bouncing off each other and listening.
But as I've gotten older, though, I have gained an appreciation, especially here in the last couple of years, for classical and especially jazz, because I find that with so much on my plate with work and family and stuff, that jazz really is something I can tap into that really helps me decompress. You know what I mean? I find it very, I find it a relaxing form of music. And I think I'd spent a lot of years, you know, being like a rock, you know, pop rock guy or whatever. And I didn't really open the door and give it its just due and really didn't allow it in. And I'm kicking myself. I really wish I had a lot earlier. I find it very enjoyable and I never thought that I would.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's got a lot of depth to it, you know, and the musicians are phenomenal. You know, when
Fantastic. Yeah.
you sort of the level of musicianship they display is phenomenal. There's quite a funny Bill Bruford, you know, the drummer who was in Yes and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Worked with Yes and Crimson, well, all the prog bands, you know, but he also worked with Chick Corea and a lot of jazz guys as well. And he's very funny the way he talks about, you know, how, you know, Chris Squire would still be getting his bass out the case and stuff by the time Chick Corea had written and recorded a whole album.
Yeah.
The flow rate with these jazz guys is amazing, you know. And people with that sort of think, well, it's all a bit technical or whatever, but it's not. You know, music is never just technical, you know, and no. That kind of complexity, as it were, is just fascinating in itself, you know. So it's and the great exponents of it, you know. So I'm thinking like Miles Davis, really worth listening to for anybody who's, you know, wondering about where to get into jazz. I'd say his stuff from, you know, the late 60s is really fascinating because it's got a sort of rock kind of edge to it. And
yeah.
And one of my favorites is Thelonious Monk. I think his playing
amazing.
It's just mind-blowing, you know.
Yeah, amazing. Some of those artists are just and as technical as it is, and what virtuoso players those guys are, you can still hear all the heart and the soul in it too.
Totally.
You know,
absolutely. And with Monk, you get the whole thing, you know. It's like really from the heart, from the soul, and it's very directly, you know.
I want to know, you know, before we sign off here, the best piece of advice that you could give or that you've been given. And it doesn't just got to be music related. I've been trying to end these interviews with getting the best piece of advice that somebody's gotten.
Yeah, well, if it's a right across the board, I guess be curious.
Be curious. Okay.
Curious. And I think for musicians, it's like, learn your instrument. I know that sounds very boring, but in the end, that's what it comes down to, you know, when you've got over all the sort of quirks and gimmicks and latest fads and stuff, you know, learn your instrument. It gives you a great deal of pleasure.
And you are a multi-instrumentalist, right?
Well, I play guitar mainly, and I play piano not terribly well, but
you have one or the other. Do you have one or the other that you prefer to sit down and write songs on, though?
Again, the pendulum's always swinging, you know, at the moment.
Yeah.
Piano, you know, but for quite a while it's been guitar, especially acoustic guitar. So my solo albums, all the songs have come from guitar ideas.
Well, it's been a real honor talking to you, sir. I look forward to this. And you, sir, are a legend, and I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. It's just been a blast talking to you, man. It really has. And I'm going to spend the rest of my night. Wang Chunging.
Please do. Have a good one.
I don't even know what the hell that even means, but I'm going to do it anyway. No, it was really great talking to you. And when you've got something else coming up, I will stay in touch, and hopefully we can jump on here and we can do this again. It was really fun talking to you.
Okay, great. Have a good one.
Jack, appreciate it, sir. Thank you much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. There he goes, folks. That is the great Jack Hughes. You may know him from Jack Hughes and the Quartet. You might know him from his solo work. You might also know him from this little pop new wave band from the 80s called Wang Chung. Everybody have fun tonight. Everybody have fun tonight. Everybody. Come on, Keith, help me out. Everybody Wang Chung tonight. I'll tell you what, man, you are the most worthless, useless co-host. Well, actually, I never made him the co-host. Sorry, Keith. Got a little out of sorts there. That's the great Jack Hughes from Wang Chung. If you don't know, you ought to know. You should be very disappointed at yourself that you don't know. Go back and do your homework. There's a lot more than just everybody have fun tonight, dance hall days. Let's go, Emma, let's go, and come on. Dance hall, dance hall. It makes me just want to sing and dance to that guy's music. And I think that's probably something that would make him very happy to hear, because that's a man that really you can just tell is passionate and loves music. That, of course, is the great Jack Hughes. That's Hues. If you're going out there looking for him on the musical platforms, go check out his solo stuff. Go check out his work with Jack Hughes and the quartet. Go find him. Go support him. He's an OG, a legit soldier from back in the 80s, much like myself, much like Pops back there. So go out and find him on all the platforms. Go check him out. I'm sure he's got a website. He's got all that shit. You people with your computers, you know what to do. Jack Hughes, Hues. Go fucking find him. Go give the man some love and support because Uncle Rex said so. Sounded like Stone Cold there for a minute because Uncle Rex said so. Anyways, man, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Like I promised Jack, I'm going to go and spend the rest of my night Wang Chunging, and I'm not even sure what the hell that means or if I'll get arrested for it. Who knows? But hope you guys enjoyed that episode of Pod Scum. And I want to remind you guys, as always, to take it easy and keep it sleazy.